Hello again, and welcome to the Strongest Steel podcast. This is episode 10 of the Strongest Steel podcast. I'm Scott Lunny, the director for District 3 of the United Steelworkers. I use the pronouns he and him, and I will just start by acknowledging that we are on the traditional, ancestral, and stolen lands of Coast Salish peoples, the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations in particular. So give thoughts to learning about our colonial history, understanding reconciliation, and figuring out ways that we can act collectively to move forward with justice for Indigenous people in our country. Have a exciting June podcast for you. June is Pride Month, so we are going to talk about Pride things, and I've got some great guests on the podcast today, and I will note that I'm excited to have the president of the BC Federation of Labor here in our studio. She was, I think, in awe of our wonderful studio, which is basically Brett's office done up for the podcast. But anyway, I think coveting the Steelworker studio. Yeah, Sussanne Skidmore, anyway. Great to have you, Sussanne.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And joining us on our online, I guess, is Catie Jones from Local 5220 at Alta Steel. Say hello, Catie.
Hi.
Thank you for joining us. Appreciate you being here. Yeah. And we also have Brandon Nicholson from Local 1-184 in, northern Saskatchewan. I guess all of Saskatchewan. There's members, but Brandon, say hello.
Hello. Coming from PA right now, Treaty 6 and the homeland of the Métis Nation. So.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us, Brandon. I know you've been busy lately, so I appreciate you taking the time. So yeah, I don't know. I just want to kick off by saying, we've really been trying in District 3 to do more around Pride issues and rights and being involved and supportive. I know we've got a long way to go, particularly in some of the parts of Western and Northern Canada, and a long way to go probably in some of the parts of our union. But we are working towards that. And I am not the person to talk most about these issues. I'm just gonna try and turn it over to the three of you to talk a little bit about what's going on in your world around those issues. In particular, hopefully how it intersects with what we're doing as unions in other fronts, and just to share what's your thoughts on it, and even some advice on how we as District 3 and the Steelworkers can do more to be engaged and supportive. So Sussanne, maybe over to you, and maybe give us a little bit of who you are too.
Sure. Sure. Thanks for having me. I'm super excited to be here. Scott said, Sussanne Skidmore. I'm the first out queer president of a federation here in BC ever, which is exciting, and actually of almost all of the federations. The other out queer person who's elected as president of a federation is in Newfoundland. So we like to say there's rainbows across the country, which is lots of fun. But there's still representation across the country, which is really great. And my pronouns are she and her. Super excited to talk about all things Pride. For me as a queer person, of course, Pride is every month. We were joking about, I should have worn more rainbows and all of this, but it's important that unions are talking about not just Pride Month, but like human rights and social justice issues around folks who are, in the umbrella, the 2S QIA plus umbrella, because those are everyone's rights. And it's what we do as unions, right? Whether we're lifting up, women's rights or human rights or workers' rights, like queer folks are identified in that big spectrum of human rights that workers' rights are as well. So I'm excited your union's talking about it. Scott, you've been an incredible ally not just to me as a person, as a leader, but also to the community, and showing and championing and leading by example about what union leadership's supposed to look like, and what being supportive and being an active accomplice and not just an ally is. And we can talk a bit about that a bit more. But yeah, super excited you're doing this podcast, and thanks for the support all the time. So yeah.
I'm so glad you're here, actually, as the Fed president, but in particular talking about these issues, because it's important, and it's your leadership certainly even before you were the Fed president on these issues is really instrumental in our labor movement, in particular in BC. So, but all across the country, because I know you're involved, the CLC and federally and the NDP and stuff. So thanks for that. Catie, maybe give us a little bit of a background about you, and maybe tell us a little bit about some of the issues that you've been spearheading, I know, in Alberta.
Yeah, it's been quite a journey, especially over the last, I'd say, 2.5 months. First off, Susan, the accomplice instead of ally, I absolutely love, because that's exactly true. When we talk about allies, we want to have somebody who's not just standing there being like, yeah, woo, pride. You want somebody who's actively out there working right alongside with us, who's throwing those rainbow grenades into the crowd and sprinkling them with, rainbow colors. And so I really like that you used accomplice. So myself, I did not actually come to terms with my own gender identity and sexual identity orientation until I was into my adult years. I use the pronouns she, they, and I also identify with the sexual orientation of bisexual. So I dabble a little bit into both the sexual orientation and gender identity and expression. When I was younger, growing up, I was not in a comfortable space or a safe space to explore that side of who I am. After I met my now husband, he gave me that safe space. I was able to really dive deep and reach out, and the community really helped me a lot. I've got a lot of friends within the Rainbow community, and it actually helped out immensely when it came to my own daughter. So my daughter came to us at 7 years old and said, "Mom, I feel like I'm in the wrong body." She is a 10-year-old transgender child, and currently we are living in Alberta through all of these quite interesting policies, and the climate has completely shifted. When I first came forward with my own person and experience, it was a different world than it is today. She's definitely gone through some hard times, and I definitely feel like she needs that support. She feels like she doesn't have control over her own body and her own future. So the days following the announcement here in Alberta about the transgender essentially policies, they are under the title parent rights policies, but they're really restricting her right to her bodily autonomy. And I pushed forward through a petition, and that petition has grown so much since then. We've been reaching out to media outlets. I've been reaching out to organizations that support other transgender children and transgender individuals, gender diverse individuals. And I've actually had several parents come forward to me as well. And one of them is actually a member of our union on site. So I thought that was very touching. And they themselves even came to me and said, "Hey, I've got somebody else who's looking for some help in this." And they're both parents to children that have come forward as transgender. So it's been, even though there's been a lot of negativity, I feel like it's actually brought forward the actual topic, so people are more aware of it in a more positive sense.
Yeah, it's interesting, and thank you so much, Catie, for sharing all of that with us. And I think how much is the petition at now? It was like, how many names are on your petition now?
I believe last time I checked, it was 15,000.
Wow.
Yeah, which
Just
is incredible.
over.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, and no, and I think it's great that it's causing folks to speak up in some of our workplaces and some of our locals, and you find that the more, I think sometimes people didn't talk about issues, whether it's around this or around pride or trans issues or other issues, and don't realize how many folks in and around them in their workplace and in their locals actually are not just supportive, but have some involvement, some experience, and just have not talked about it because it's not something that was talked about in the workplace or the local. And so I think positive or negative, talking about issues and how it's impacting folks in the community is important, because as unions, we care about everybody's human rights. We're supposed to care about everybody's human rights, and we need to be understanding that it's not just the folks that are talking about it; it's other folks that don't talk about it that are impacted as well. And so, and just to be clear, I think you're safely dancing around it a bit, Catie. It's very hateful actions that the government in Alberta has taken towards the trans community, and it's important that people speak up, like you and others.
Well, those negative policies have definitely also been present on my work site as well. Like, that's definitely come forward. I've been called by some names that fall under the category of hate speech. One of the news articles that me and my daughter and I were featured in was passed around site. There was a lot of negativity around that as well. So there is still lots of room to grow. These policies, although they have brought together a strong group of individuals that's either are a part of the gender diverse community or support the gender diverse community, they've also brought forward a lot of those individuals that have extreme hate and anger towards that community. And I firmly believe that anger and that hate is rooted in misinformation and a lack of understanding.
Yeah, definitely. Brandon, how will you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you and what you've been doing in your local and also in the broader union around
all right, thank you. My name's Brandon Nicholson. I'm from, as we said earlier, Saskatchewan. I'm the financial secretary currently for United Steelworkers Local 1-184. And for the last couple of months, I've been working directly in the local office. And, there's been, the Scott Moe and the Sask Party had pulled a very similar maneuver as the UCP did in Alberta, and so there's been some considerable mobilization behind trying to get our side of the story, if you will, out there to have those conversations. We can't control the dialogue, but we can darn sure make sure that we're there participating in it. Then I'm pretty happy to say that this June we had our first Prince Albert Pride participation with the United Steelworkers in our local here. We have very few members here, but it was good to go out there and do a little volunteering and have a little presence. And to Catie's point, I think education and information is important, but it's also important that the people directly affected by these policies are out there as a presence as well. We all know that these people are vulnerable, right? But its presence, I think, that is a major contributor to sharing that getting that education out there as well.
And how's it been for you, Brandon, in the local and in the broader labor movement? Have you found space for you to speak about your own issues or things that you're passionate about in terms of your identity?
Well, I wasn't out when I first started with steel. I actually joined. I got my first card when I was 15, and it's a process. It's self-education. It's self-learning. But I don't know a more powerful factor in me, becoming comfortable with myself more than getting out and participating in steel worker activities, beyond the local. I still remember after most education courses, they give you the little self-identifier checklist. And I still remember the first time I checked the box I never used to. And so I really felt like steel gave not just the space to be who I am, but the comfort and reassurance that I had support kind of automatically in that. And so steel gave me the confidence to be who I am. And there's been a lot of work that's gone in after, with the Human Rights Committee, the Steel Pride Working Group, with the Saskatchewan Federation of Labor. But it's always been a welcoming space, and the labor movement in general, a person can't help but appreciate, even though we probably all recognize we've got members that are a little bit behind the times, I guess one could say.
Yeah. In some parts of our district more than others, but yeah. Sussanne, do you think that's always are we getting better at that in the labor movement? I will say I think there's still ways to go, but I'd like to think we're getting better at being accomplices and allies, and letting people take space, but maybe you see other unions too. So maybe you can comment on that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I truly do think we've moved the dial for sure. I mean, gosh, we're talking here we are on a podcast in a steelworker office talking about trans issues and trans rights and human rights and queer rights and all of those things. I don't know, growing up, I'm not sure that I could have ever envisioned a world where I thought something like this would happen, or even just myself being in the position I'm in and being able to be who I truly am, right? Just being able to be my authentic self. So yeah, we've come a long way. There's tons more work to do, but I am excited because there is a lot of really cool long-term intentional work happening, right? We're seeing collective agreement language being bargained into collective agreements. In fact, steelworkers were at the forefront of making sure that some of the, transitioning language was available for folks, and, and stood side by side with the queer community when we were continue to fight for same-sex, marriage rights or equality rights or anything like that. So, the union movement is key in all of the human rights movements. And so like anything, I think I think we're out of front of sort of where the rest of the world is on this stuff. And part of our job is to make sure, like both Catie and Brandon said, is that we continue to do that education, that we continue to have welcoming spaces, that we talk to people where they're at, and we try and make what I like to call brave spaces, because it's not always safe spaces, but where people can learn a little bit, where maybe they can screw up a little bit, but where they can find some space to learn and grow also. That's what unions do. We provide that to our memberships. You're not going to get that in your work site necessarily, but you're going to get it from your union, right? So that when I look at that kind of stuff, I think we lead it across the country when we're talking about human rights on this level, especially during Pride Month in June, right? So, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. I don't know if Brandon, Catie, do you have any? I mean, I know we try to get into our workplaces a little bit more, but about these issues and educate the managers along with our members. But oftentimes there's some barriers to that. Have either of you had any experience with the employers doing anything, or the locals doing anything around human rights, or talking about keeping the workplace respectful?
Well, if I'm being completely and entirely honest with you, Scott, My local doesn't have a human rights committee. It is technically in our constitution, in our bylaws, that we're supposed to have one. We don't currently. That's something that was put forward a couple of months ago. Nothing's been acted on. But we definitely, for smaller locals, because mine would be considered a smaller local, need to start there. Start talking about human rights in general, because it covers everybody. So if we can reach out to everybody about our human rights, then we can branch out more into the 2S LGBTQIA plus rights, or we can branch out into the rights of like family members, for example. We've had a couple of people on our site that were denied bereavement leave because it was not called a funeral. It was called a ceremony of life. So like things like that. So like for smaller locals, definitely starting with the basis of actual human rights and moving forward would definitely help. And definitely having education for our leadership, like not just education that's out there and is an option, but potential education that is required, like ethics and human rights acknowledgement for all of our presidents, our vice presidents of our locals, our staff reps, everybody that holds a leadership position would be, I think, a good start.
Yeah, and just to stress, I mean, that's a good point, Catie, that, a human rights committee is mandated by our constitution. But I know from the work that we've been doing trying to develop a district human rights committee that a lot of locals, you're not alone in that. A lot of locals don't have a human rights committee it's actually required by the Constitution. And, I would just small local or big local, you can have a human rights committee of 1 or 2 people and build it out from there, just like the other committees that are mandated in our Constitution. And so, it's important that we keep pushing that and keep keep that going. And and I agree. I mean, we're with the education stuff, we're really we're trying to do more around education around lots of issues, but obviously we do steward and health and safety and stuff like that, but we're really trying to push out the education on other issues, not just to us LGBTQIA plus issues, but also other issues. We've obviously had Women of Steel for a long time, but we're doing a lot around Indigenous members. We're trying to do some anti-racism training for our members and gender-based violence training with our Elevating Action program. And so, I mean, there's no end to the amount of training we need to do. And I think we need to just keep pushing the envelope a little bit further and get to where we can go. Yeah, definitely hear you on the Human Rights Committee. And I know Brett's been pushing in our, I'm looking over there because Brett's over there if you're watching on YouTube. But Brett's been pushing our human rights committees at the district level and at the national level pretty hard, along with some other folks, Brandon included, I think, and probably you, Catie, as well, to do more at all the levels. And I think that's great. We need to do that, but we need to not just have you all pushing that. We need to be pushing that as other leaders in our union as well. Mm-hmm. Brandon, how about around the SFL? Like, is there a lot of support for pride issues and fighting that? I know the Saskatchewan NDP has been pretty supportive and fighting against the trans hate and that stuff. But how about the other unions and the SFL?
I think it's been a pretty collective effort, to kind of piggyback off the points that were just made. Like the workplace doesn't really matter where you are. It's a natural intersection of equity seeking groups, right? Because at the end of the day, most, if not all of them, are workers. All of us are workers, right? And so, the intersections between all these issues are there. And I think SFL, I mean, I haven't been to, say Alberta or BC, but, SFL, we've got a pretty robust roster of equity-seeking groups. spread out, small population, big distances. It's a little bit tough, but between the WhatsApps and the regular quarterly, I think they are meetings. There's some solidarity there without question. Everybody's kind of, I think it's fair to say, getting geared up for the election, but every day we're out there, we're speaking on these issues, not just the ones that are directly affecting us, but the full spectrum of the intersection. And SFL has done a great job of it.
Yeah, like elections scheduled for October of this year in Saskatchewan and BC.
Yeah.
So, what about the BC world, Sussanne? How are things going? I know there's we have a fairly aligned government here currently in BC, so I think we get mostly good news from the BC government. But is there anything you want to share on that?
Sure. I mean, obviously, it's such a privilege to have a NDP government. So I will run through the giant list of things, which I often get in trouble for when I'm meeting with the other Federation of Labor presidents, although Manitoba now gets to compete for who has the greatest premier, but so we'll happily continue to have that competition. But there's lots of things going on here in BC and in our Federation of Labor with in conjunction with the Canadian Labour Congress. There's been a lot of work, some of it in reaction to the hate rallies that happened earlier in the year. Gosh, it seems like a million years ago, but it was only a few months ago, where we tried to do counter protests and counter rallies, and communities did a variety of different things, and we were able to shut down some of the hate and then started having some conversations about how we actually deal with these things, as they come up. How do we actually truly, counter hate movements, right? Whether it's hate towards trans people because that's the current target, or queer people in general, or, people who come here from other countries or speak different languages or don't look like we look, or whatever that might be, because it's a bigger political, sort of alt-right thing. That we're seeing sort of come into mainstream quite a bit. And so we actually started having conversations, particularly around the, trans safety and trans rights and human rights aspect of this, and trying to figure out how do we get out ahead of this, right? I don't want to chase these folks around who are spewing hatred. It's how do we make sure we're continuing to elect a government who doesn't hate trans people, who actually is doing progressive, proactive things to make sure that trans folks can have their gender markers on their identity and have access to healthcare that they need and all of those things. That's what's happening in British Columbia. There's a lot of really good stuff. So we've been doing some work with one of our committees around sort of tackling hate, right? And looking at it in a bigger, broader picture. There's a lot of work to do there, but part of it is this piece around how do we build, our own team, right? I don't want to say army. That's probably the wrong word, but oh well, there it is out in the podcast. How do we build our own movement, really, is actually truly what it's about. How do we build our own movement and bring people with us? And part of that is, you talk about whether it's, be more than a bystander, or the new program you guys are working on. Tell me the name again.
Elevating Action.
Thank you. I was trying to remember that in my brain. But it's actually those programs are critical in actually meeting people where they're at, talking to them about the way they can make a difference in the world and changing things. I mean, that is obviously sort of specific around gender-based violence, but that plays into this as well, right? And so, I know folks, Scott, included, as well as the past president of the BC Federation of Labor, who did the Be More Than a Bystander program. It changed their lives. It changed the way that they interacted in the world. And it's we need more of that, right? We need to grow more leaders who have that frame of mind, that aren't afraid to stand beside us in community, where we live, and actually make a difference, right? Because it's for the first time ever, in my life, I just turned 50. It's out there on social media, so it's no secret. I'll throw my age around, but at 50 years old, never in my life did I ever think that I would be nervous about being a queer person in this country. And I am now, in a way that I never thought possible. And, but, because there are good people out in the world, because there, are good programs that are happening in the labor movement and in British Columbia and Manitoba and other great places like Catie and Brandon are talking about, I'm seeing the reversal. Like Catie talked about it as this like moment of bad creates a moment of good, right? Mm-hmm. So that, that's kind of the, part of the gist of it, right? Yeah.
I've just realized, I just want to point out that I think Sussanne is now older than me because I'm 49 and 24 months old. So because
you're never aging.
Because I'm never
timeless.
I'm just going to count by months. Yeah, after 49, I'm counting by months. So, but yeah, no, sorry. I
did see a big note that said we're coming up on 30 minutes. Did you see that?
Yeah, no, I didn't. But that's okay. That's okay. It's my podcast. So. But the elevating action, I just want to point out, and this is a little bit of an aside, is our version of kind of like Be More Than a Bystander on gender-based violence with the CFLPA, who are now newly affiliated to the Canadian Labour Congress. Yeah. So that's the Canadian Football League's Players Association, who are taking steps to be a union with the rest of us and join the Canadian Labour Congress, and hopefully the BC Lions players are going to join the BC Fed.
That's the goal. I told them that was my next target for sure.
But it is good, and it is I think through that program and through the Be More Than a Bystander, my belief is the more we talk and sit down and really talk to people as uncomfortable as it may be, and in some of our workplaces and some of our locals and some of our communities, the more you talk to people, like just kind of respect and like the right thing to do kind of come out in the end, it is really like, I really do think it's a bunch of like loud folks who are truly a minority, who are, spewing a lot of the hateful stuff around. And, if you can get in a room with a bunch of people that, the sort of the right direction and respect for people's just basic right to be kind of, I think, prevails. And so I think the number one thing we can do, we talked a bit about education, but that's what education is in a union environment, is bringing a bunch of people together and talking to each other and learning from each other. And the more of that we can do, the more I think you're going to have people go out and do the proper thing. I think I do think that's the best thing we can do. Sorry, go ahead, Catie.
No, it's all good. I thought you were done there, so my apologies.
I should be done. Yeah, I gotta let you all talk. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to play off the whole education avenue where we all group together in one room. That is definitely a way to reach out to a majority of people. One of the ways that we can actually impact not just our transgender or gender diverse individuals within our union or on our job sites, but also anybody who's feeling uncomfortable because of their identity or their affiliation with like a protected group, such as the queer community. Have a security plan or a safety plan, similar to like what you would have in case of a fire. You have an emergency plan to get out of the house. When my daughter and I first started coming forward with a lot of these articles and media interviews after the policies were announced, we actually sat down with her principal at her school and talked about the potential hate that could come forward. We talked about the potential repercussions it could have on her, both physically and mentally. And we set forward a plan on how to address not just that, but get her out of that situation. If she was to feel uncomfortable or threatened, she was to immediately go and talk to not her teacher, the principal. She was to go straight to the principal's office, and they would call me and I would drive in and we would attend and address that issue right then and there. And that's actually not a bad idea for us to extend outwards, because we can educate in a group. But when it comes to individuals, that minority that's loud, it's scary if it's just one of you standing there. And if you don't, as an individual, have the strength to stand there and scream back, at least have that plan to get out of the screaming.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's like we were talking about it in our work site, like at the BC Federation of Labor, when we're out in public and doing like a regional conference or somewhere, we're going out to Chilliwack. Chilliwack's got amazing trans school board trustee, Terry Westerby, who's like just an amazing human being, period. We're bringing Terry in to do a panel or something at our conference. And so part of what we're doing is like, it's an OSH plan, basically. You treat it like your health and safety in your workplace. You're like, I have a responsibility to make sure that the people who come to our conference have a, respectful and safe work environment or, environment to have their conference in. But yeah, it's the same. Like if there was a fire in this building, what would we do? If there was hate in this building, what would we do? Right? Like it's that same. I love the way that, it's like you just build that in. It's your safety plan. It's unfortunate that we have to have that and it sucks. But if you think about like it's from a worker perspective, right? If you're a trans worker at a work site, what's the safety plan if something happens, right? How do we make sure that workers are safe? And what is the plan? Because through our workers' compensation system, whatever province we're in, a worker has the right to be safe in their work site, right? And that's another angle.
Yeah, everybody has a right to be safe. It's right in the Canadian Charter of Human Rights. Everybody has the right to live with dignity and to the fullest extent of their life. It can even be out there on your everyday outings. I also had a security plan for my family, specifically me and my children, when I'd go to the grocery store after these policies were announced. If I noticed anything that was very targeted or uncomfortable, or you see somebody who's clearly like they identified us from the news article, well, guess what? My children and I are just leaving. We're ditching and we're leaving. So it can be extended beyond the work site. It can be extended to everyday situations. And I agree, we shouldn't have to have those plans in place because we do have the right to live with dignity and respect. Unfortunately, it is a reality now. So it sucks.
Yeah, I think it's really, I mean, thank you both, Sussanne and Catie, for saying that, because I think, you're both very strong individuals, strong human beings, but, to say like how much of an impact it has on this isn't people complaining about nothing. This is about basic safety and basic rights, basic human rights that everyone should have, basic worker rights that everyone should have in their workplace. And we got to stop thinking about this as a political issue or any other kind of issue to the folks that are maybe a little wondering why we're doing this. It's about human rights. It's about worker rights. It's about safety for everybody and their family. If we're not about that as a union, if we're not about that as a labor movement, I don't know what we're about. That's what our unions were founded on, is to make sure that regular folks could live a better life, have economic security, have security in your community, have security for your family. That's what it's all about. So anyway, thank you both for sharing that. Brandon, what's Pride in Prince Albert? That's probably a big deal. Pride event in Prince Albert. What's next for you for you or for your local or up in Saskatchewan? What do we do? What are we doing moving forward?
Well, I was actually invited, friends with one of the co-chairs for Prince Albert Pride. And so I'm trying to form, I like the term intersection. You hear it a lot with me, but, between the National Steel Pride Working Group and SFL and D3 Human Rights and just my contacts, throughout the labor movement, I'm putting in some time with them and it's I'm big on coalition building and, I'm big on intersectionality. And so, getting out into the community and building those connections with not just the Pride, but different equity seeking groups within the community.
You got to answer the phone too. It sounds like.
I thought I unplugged it. Actually, I don't know what happened there. I do apologize.
And don't forget to do the books for the local, because you are the financial secretary.
Yes.
So, I'm supposed to talk about some resources we have, and it was up on the screen, and it's waiting for it to come back. But we do have some resources around to us LGBTQIA plus. So we have at usw.ca/Steel Pride. See, I'm actually older than Sussanne, because I have to take my glasses off to read over there and put them on to read over here. And so there's a transition handbook and inclusion tool, and there's other resources for locals on those issues. So again, it's at usw.ca/Steel Pride. And then I think we're going to try to wrap up here. So I don't know, Sussanne, if you had any closing words before we wrap up.
Gosh, too many for a closeout. But I mean, mostly just thank you for honoring Pride Month as a union, and so not everybody was at the Canadian Labour Congress convention, but it was sort of in the height of when all of this hate was really, really rising. It was around when the legislation was starting to get formed in Alberta, and all of that. And so the groundswell of the conversation at convention was very emotional and very urgent. There was an urgency to make sure that we were doing some good work as a labor movement on this. And Scott, I know you know what you did, but not everybody does. And Scott stood with me, beside me, and talked about why, like himself personally as a union leader, as a leader of his organization, supports this work, supports the work that we're doing, supports, queer rights and human rights and all of that in a very vulnerable and intentional way, because I believe that like attitude reflects leadership. And that was just a really good example of how to lead by example. And so I think it's important for the podcast listeners to know that, that you do like live the values that you talk about. And I'm really thankful to be kind of in this labor movement moment in time with folks like you who are not afraid to do this work, because it's not easy. So thank you.
Oh, thanks for that. Anytime. Hey, Catie, can you maybe just tell us a little bit more about your petition and what's next for you?
Well, the petition is going to remain open so long as these policies are out there and targeting our minority children of the gender diverse community. It's on change.org. So if you want to go on there, you can take a look, sign it. I really appreciate every signature. And I encourage you just to help give these children their voice.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, awesome. Thanks for that, Catie. Yeah, that's great. And so I think we're pressing up for the end of the podcast. I know we could talk lots more about lots of things, but I really do appreciate all of you joining us today on the Strong as Steel podcast. And thank you, Catie, for being here, for what all you do in our union, and for all you do in your community and in your workplace, and keep at it and keep pushing, and we'll just let us know, and we'll have your back on what you're trying to do, because it's really good, and it's having an impact. And if it's a great example for other folks. If there's something that that's important to you, that you want to fight for, do it. And the unions can be helpful and can be a vehicle for that. So anyway, thank you so much for joining us, Catie.
Thank you.
And Brandon, keep it up, buddy. And I know you're doing a lot of stuff, but appreciate you taking the time as well. And look forward to getting back. I was up at see Brandon in PA, I don't know, a little while ago. So hope to get up there again and hang out with the local a bit more.
I did have a quick plug, if that's all right. I just want to throw it out there. Yeah, if we got to cut it, we got to cut it. I just want to throw out there on the SFL website, we've got our equity newsletter that's quarterly. Our staff resource for the equity committees, Jessica Boyer, just lovely person. She puts a lot of work into that. And coming soon, hopefully soon, SFL free resource for all equity groups. So, for example, anything we have, we could share through that resource. And I just want to say kudos for all the good work that the Jessica, our SFL staff resource, Gerard Dillman, our chairperson for the Pride and Solidarity Committee, and the rest of the committee. There's a few of us, I won't name them all, but thank you all for your good work. Appreciate it. So.
We'll keep the plug in, Brandon, if you make sure that they all sign up and listen to the Strongest Steel podcast. So how about there you
I
go.
did my
That's
half.
Good. There
and
we
sign
go.
the petition.
Yeah, and sign the petition. Yeah. Okay, and I just want to and just thank Sussanne for coming and joining us here in the District 3 office, but also for just all the support you give to the steelworkers, all our locals and all our members as the Federation president, and really appreciate you, all the work that you do and your leadership. Thank you. And I've been remiss. I just really want to thank Brett Barden, who's A, for letting us set up the podcast studio in his office, but B, for all the work he does in getting the podcast ready, but also all the work he does for our union around communications and but also around trying to do our human rights committee and to us LGBTQIA plus rights and many other things that Brett does. So I appreciate that. And shout out to Tyler Christensen who does the tech stuff for the podcast and for on all the platforms, and who won't cut out Brandon's plug as long as he continues to promote the Strongest Steel podcast. So with that, we're gonna end. D3comms at usw.ca is where you can give feedback or ask questions or suggest ideas for future podcasts. So that's D, like the letter D, a 3, and then comms, COMM. at usw.ca. I forgot I'm supposed to look over there. And at USW District 3 is our social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And if you're a regular listener, keep listening to the podcast and tell all your friends, your family, your neighbors, kids. Everyone needs to listen to the Strongest Steel podcast. This is my new catchphrase. It's the most popular steelworker podcast in Western Canada. So let's keep it that way. But seriously, thanks everyone for being here. Thanks for listening. And that's it. That's a wrap for episode 10 of the Strongest Steel podcast.